I'm here on a sunny Saturday afternoon at the apartment of Teresa D'Amico, who I'm very fortunate to be talking to because she's a nice human being. And her father is somebody who's very dear to all of us who listen to this music, the clarinetist Hank D'Amico, who didn't get a lot of press when he was alive and didn't live long enough. So I'm hoping to do something through this little video to make people know more about who Hank was and what he did and what he was like. So, Teresa, you said you played poker with him. Or you played poker with the musicians.
Yeah, when he'd have some of his musician friends over, they would play poker. I don't know if they'd let me win or if I actually won sometimes, but and occasionally I'd sneak a sip of their whiskey too.
Okay, all positive learning experiences.
Yes, something which in those days, didn't send your parents to jail.
Yeah. Who were the people who came to visit?
Oh, I wish I remembered all the names. There was, well, of course, George Barnes would come, and his lovely daughter Alexandra, which is how I got in touch with you. We were about the same age, she and I, so sometimes she'd come over when her dad did, and we'd hang out together in my room. And he, let's see, who used to come? I'm going to have to think about that one. I'm going to have to think about that, who the people were.
I mean, there were a lot of people who, George played with everybody, but there were people who were regulars in that circuit, like Bob Haggart and Lou Stein and Cliff Lehman.
Cliff Lehman, yeah, yes. I know he had come over. Yeah. I remember that. But I was young, so I don't really remember a lot.
You said your father didn't keep stuff. He didn't keep his records and things like that. Did he not like his own playing?
I don't know. He just, it was strange actually. He didn't keep his own records. He actually mostly listened when he was home to classical. He didn't even have a lot of other people's records, jazz people. I mean, the only other records I remember having in the house other than classical were probably like Frank Sinatra, and some of that was because of my older sister. So it wasn't so much my dad's collection.
Okay. That's not unusual at all. I have this theory, which has yet to be proven or disproven, that if you go off and you play this music for a living, if you're lucky 5 nights a week, when you come home you want to hear something different.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Sure, yeah.
So, what do you know about his parents? What about his family?
Oh, yeah, well, I knew his family very well. They were all in Buffalo, and I used to go up there after he died. His eldest brother, Jack, and his wife, Carol, they kind of took me under their wing, and they used to fly me up every Christmas and in the summers. So I actually spent a lot of time with his family. And I knew his mother. His mother was infamous in Buffalo, and Mama Jenny was her name. And his father was Louis. His father's name was Louis. And his father they came from the old country. They came from Italy. And his father always was dressed in his suit. I didn't know him for long because he died when I was little, but I remember him, and he was always dressed up, no matter what. If he was just staying home all day, he was dressed up. And his mother was always in the kitchen, always yelling that you were too skinny and you should eat.
So that's the nature of being infamous?
Yeah. Well, she also, I remember a story about her that some kids were riding by on a bicycle and they were being, naughty as kids can be, and they were yelling at her or something, and she just took her broom and went after them and knocked them over, knocked them off the bicycle. She didn't take any guff. And he had 5 siblings, and his oldest sister, Angela, she played the piano in the silent movies. when she was young, and everybody in the family was musical. He was the only one that really went into it totally professionally, but everybody played something either on the side or just for fun. And Angela's daughter, my cousin Mary Lou Nana, she became a very well-known musician. She just recently died. She was in the Buffalo Philharmonic. She was a violin player. So the D'Amico family in Buffalo had a lot of musical ties.
The books say he was born in Rochester.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, but they moved to Buffalo when he was very young. He was like a year or two old. Yeah.
And going back even farther, where did the D'Amicos come from in Italy?
They came from a town called Santa Croce, which was near Naples.
Okay.
Yeah. There's actually a D'Amico Park. One of my cousins wrote a whole book about, like a self-published book, about the family history. Yeah. And there's a picture of the D'Amico Park.
So he gets into music rather early, from
Yeah.
what I can tell.
Yeah.
If he's born in 1915 and in 1936 he's recording with a major band. How did he talk about that?
Well, I only really know the history from kind of, reading up on it after, when I got older. How he came to New York and just, kind of, I guess, lucked into getting where he did so quickly. Yeah. But, he didn't really talk about it much at home. No.
Was it work, do you think? Because listeners tend to romanticize artists, musicians,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm going off to create immense beauty tonight, or is it I'm off to the gig, I'll see
no.
it. No,
It wasn't just work to him. It was his life. Yeah. I mean, it actually caused a lot of rift in the family because his some of his family felt he should have been more responsible because he had children, and we never had a lot of money because he didn't want to do anything but his music. And I think they felt, and my mother, she never bothered him about it. She was a singer. That's how they met.
oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, my mother was a singer. She gave it up to have a family, but that's how they met. They met in a club in New York, and they
What was her name?
Grace Hart
Okay,
was her maiden name.
that's an evocative name
Yeah.
in itself. So.
And yeah, I mean, she lived to a good age, so I knew my mother very well, and heard a lot of stories from her, of course. And when actually after my dad died, I didn't even realize this, and it's no big secret at this point. They never officially got married, so it was unfortunately very bad for her because New York State, to this day, does not recognize common law marriages. And she got nothing when he died, except for a small payment on.
Not Social Security,
Yeah,
you mean?
she didn't get any of his money, nothing. So and like people tried really hard to get that reversed. They had filed income tax returns for 30 years as husband and wife. Government was certainly happy to take their money as husband and wife, but not happy to give it back.
What stories did she tell you about him? Anything stick in your mind?
My mother adored my father. She was devastated by his death, as we all were, of course, but that was her man. And he told her when they got together that music was basically his first love and that he wasn't going to compromise. If she wanted a family, fine, but he wasn't going to become a salesman, like his one brother, or a teacher or whatever, to make money. That this is what he wanted to do. And she said, okay. and she wanted a family, and they had 5 children. They probably would have had more, but he was on the road. There was a big gap between some of us. Yeah.
It's interesting though, because again, in our century, we look at musicians as somewhat different. They're not professionals in the same way. And looking at the discography, it's very clear, or at least I'm intuiting, that one of the reasons your father was the person he was that he showed up on time, and he read the charts, and he did what professionals do. You don't hear stories about his bad behavior, so that's admirable in that world.
Yeah, the only thing that was ever, it was kind of funny actually, was I think in one of the liner notes of one of the Mildred Bailey Red Norvo recordings, Mildred complains about all the pot smoking, and my dad was very guilty of that apparently.
It was legal in this country at one point, so.
Well, it's funny because in the 1960s, when I was a teenager, of course, I was smoking pot and keeping it from my mother because I thought, when I found out later about my dad, I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Here I came home lying to you that I was drinking beer because, that was okay.
Any stories about music? Well, you told me, and I find this fascinating, that he was going to go on the road with Louis Armstrong.
That's what I understood. Right before he died, apparently he was going to join their band, and ironically, they were on the same flight as my dad's family, either coming to or from New York for the funeral. And they all talked to each other, and that's all I know about it really. But and he had also, he always wanted to do his own thing too. That's one of the reasons he traveled from band to band and didn't stay with one for extended periods of time. He wanted to do his own music and his own arranging, and he always tried to. The Holiday with Hank album was one of his projects that he did on his own, and he was supposed to have a band at the World's Fair in 1965 or 64, whenever it started, and that kind of fell through towards the end, which really depressed him. I kind of remember that. I remember him being very, very down and drinking a lot.
I mean, he did get to make 24 records, maybe under his own name, in the 1940s with people like Frankie Newton and Don Byas and, the cream of the crop of the time. And I hope, and some of the compositions are his, I think. So maybe he had freedom there. I don't know. But,
he was... And then he had a show on ABC Radio in the 50s, I believe, for a while, And there was a couple TV appearances that I came across. Some of them you can find easily now on YouTube that I hadn't known about growing up. That was the other thing. We didn't have a TV when I was growing up. My parents were not big TV fans. Although when my older sister finally broke down and got one for the family, my dad was very happy to see the baseball games that he had up until then been listening to on the radio. He was a big Yankees fan.
And there was music on TV in the 50s and early 60s.
Yeah. But my dad, I had heard a story. Because one of the things I remember from his practicing at home was he always had a hard time finding the right reed. I mean, he would go through just reed after reed after reed. I always remember that. And apparently one of the reasons was he had his front teeth here were not his. when he was a kid, they had been knocked out by a baseball because he was a big baseball fan. Yeah.
I mean, clarinet players fight the uphill battle of
Yes.
reeds all the time.
Right.
But you remember hearing him practice.
Oh yeah, yeah. And sometimes if he was there when I'd come home from school, he'd play the from Peter and the Wolf, the clarinet solo. Yeah.
Did you take up instruments as a kid?
Well, we all kind of learned the piano, and when I was in school, I played the flute. Yeah, but I never went on. Only my brother Donald, who's in Florida now, he's the only one that really took up seriously. He played the trumpet and the French horn.
So you were young when your father moved on.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about him as a father, not as a jazz musician?
Oh, I loved. I mean, he was a great father. He was more like a big brother than a father. Like, he didn't like to do the fatherly stuff. Like if you had a question or something, he'd like, go ask your mother. Go ask your mother. He just wanted to be your friend.
It's very sweet.
Yeah. But no, he was a good dad. I mean, yeah. There was problems and issues, but in the end, I have nothing but really pretty good memories.
And he died too young.
Yeah, and very suddenly too. Yeah, it was a quick illness, and yeah, he was just gone.
Well, let's pause here for a moment.
Okay. I was just talking about Jim and Andy's, who was a well-known musician hangout, and they were very generous people too. They had a lot to do with the memorial concert that went on for my dad a few months after his death. They basically presented it, and they had at their bar, I think they had my dad's clarinet over their bar, as well as various other musicians' instruments for a long time. And of course, I don't remember the year that they closed down, but it was sad when they did. Yeah.
I think musicians treated it as an office.
It was like it was like a second home, and definitely an office. Yeah. So that was a place he spent a lot of time at, for sure.
You'd mentioned memorabilia.
Yes.
Okay, you want to show me some
Sure.
trinkets?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.